I found someone worth my time. That was the first line of the email. No greeting. No hesitation. Just the sentence sitting there on my screen, stark and deliberate, like it had been polished before being sent. The timestamp read 11:22 p.m. Arizona time. She was supposed to be at a yoga retreat. Supposed to be unplugged. Supposed to be finding herself. Instead, she'd found someone else. My name is Miles Hartley. I'm 44 years old, a commercial architect based in Savannah, Georgia. I was sitting alone in my home office when I read the email, the room lit only by my desk lamp and the glow of the screen. The house was silent in that way it only is when you're the only one awake, when even the walls seem to be listening. I didn't react right away. That should tell you something. The second paragraph of the email hit harder. I've moved your inheritance into my personal account. It's better this way. Attached was a photo. Slightly blurry, like it had been taken in a hurry. Kendra and a man with a neatly trimmed beard, standing on a balcony with a desert sunset behind them. 2 wine glasses. Her smile was relaxed, open, unfamiliar. It wasn't the smile she gave me anymore. I stared at that photo longer than I wanted to admit, noticing details that shouldn't have mattered, already feeling the weight of what it implied. I closed the laptop without replying. I stood up and walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. Through the window, I could see the backyard we'd redesigned together 3 summers earlier. The stone path I'd laid myself. The hydrangeas she'd insisted on planting along the edges. All that careful planning. All that effort. Suddenly, it felt like a set someone had already decided to leave behind. That money she mentioned, $587,000, wasn't just a number. It came from my Aunt Elaine. The woman who took me in when my parents died in a car accident when I was 14. The woman who worked double shifts at a hospital for years so I could go to college. When she passed, she left me everything she'd saved, along with a note written in careful handwriting. Build something that lasts. I'd carried that note in my wallet for years. And now, according to my wife, it was gone. I checked my phone. No missed calls. No texts asking if I'd seen the email. No apology. No explanation. Just silence. The kind of silence that tells you the sender isn't waiting for a response. That silence mattered more than the words. If you're listening to this right now, take a second and tell me, where are you watching from? Because where I was sitting when I realized what was really happening shaped everything that came next. The signs had been there for months. I saw that clearly now, replaying recent memories with a different awareness. Kendra's retreats had become more frequent. 2 days turned into 4. 4 turned into week-long trips. Her phone stayed face down on the table. Passwords changed. Conversations shortened. Questions about finances that felt oddly specific. 3 months earlier, she'd asked where exactly the inheritance was held. Which accounts? Whether we should simplify things. I'd nodded, told her I'd think about it. I hadn't been suspicious yet. I just didn't feel ready to make decisions about money that carried that much emotional weight. Now I wondered how long she'd been waiting for me to stop thinking. I reopened the laptop and read the email again, slower this time. She hadn't even used my name. No Miles. No sign-off. Just a declaration and a theft, delivered with the confidence of someone who believed the hard part was already over. I typed 6 words in reply. Thanks for letting me know. Then I closed the laptop again. I went to bed not long after that. That surprised me. I thought I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our marriage, trying to understand where it had cracked. Instead, sleep came quickly. Deeply. The kind of sleep you get when something heavy has finally been acknowledged, even if it hasn't been resolved yet. Lying there in the dark, I realized something that probably should have scared me more than it did. I slept better knowing she wasn't coming home. What Kendra didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that I'd sensed something wrong long before that email ever arrived. The inheritance had never been where she thought it was. And her attempt to take it had just handed me something far more valuable than money. Clarity. I met Kendra 15 years ago at an industry conference in Charlotte. She was launching a wellness brand and needed an architect for her first brick-and-mortar space. I was 5 years into my career, eager for projects that felt meaningful. We married 3 years later. Built a life in Savannah. Bought the Craftsman house with the wraparound porch she loved. No kids. Her choice. The business is my baby, she used to say. For 8 years, it worked. Until it didn't. When my Aunt Elaine got sick, I took a partial leave to care for her. Kendra visited twice. Hospitals depress me, she said. I didn't argue. When Elaine passed, the money surprised both of us. And that's when Kendra's interest in our finances sharpened in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. We should invest this, she said one night. Expand the brand. I told her I needed time. That was the first real crack. 2 weeks before her final retreat, my financial advisor called. Someone's been trying to access information about your trust accounts, he said. They know your personal details, but they're failing the security protocols. I already knew which accounts he meant. That night, Kendra suggested consolidating logins. It's silly to have so many passwords, she said, avoiding my eyes. The next day, I drove to Atlanta and met with Rita Wallace, my aunt's attorney for over 20 years. I didn't accuse Kendra. I just laid out facts. Rita listened quietly, then leaned back in her chair. The trust is protected, she said. And any attempt to move those funds without authorization would be documented. Thoroughly. I asked her to set up monitoring alerts. Just in case. When I got home, Kendra was packing. She kissed me briefly before leaving. I might extend this retreat, she said. Really dive deep. I helped load her bags into the car. Watched her drive away. Then I went back inside and opened our shared cloud storage, the one labeled Home Renovation Ideas. Inside were screenshots she'd forgotten to delete. Account notes. Transfer protocols. A photo of a whiteboard with numbers circled and written beneath them, my inheritance minus a percentage labeled fees. She'd been planning this for months. I closed the folder, walked through the house, and felt something settle in my chest. Not anger. Not heartbreak. Focus. By the time her email arrived 5 days later, everything was already in motion. And she had no idea how far it had gone. Because while she thought she'd set the trap, I was about to decide exactly when to spring it. I waited exactly 24 hours before making my first move. Not because I needed time to think, but because I needed her to believe nothing was happening. Silence does strange things to people who expect chaos. It makes them overconfident. Careless. And carelessness leaves trails. By noon the next day, my phone buzzed. Did you get my email? Just that. No anger. No concern. A probe. Yes, I replied. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then vanished. Then reappeared. That's all you have to say? I stared at the message for a long moment before locking my phone and setting it face down on the desk. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence would do the work for me. Instead, I drove downtown to meet Thomas Webb, a divorce attorney Rita had mentioned months earlier during one of those hypothetical conversations couples have when they think they're being careful. His office overlooked the river, all glass and steel, the kind of place designed to project stability. He read the email twice without speaking. Then he looked up at me. She admitted to attempting to take inherited funds? Yes. And claimed she succeeded? Yes. He nodded slowly. That helps. I felt something tighten in my chest at the word helps. Not relief. Recognition. Like hearing a diagnosis confirmed. She doesn't actually have access to the trust, I said. But she's tried. Thomas's mouth twitched. That's even better. We filed that afternoon. Divorce citing financial misconduct. Fraud. Misrepresentation. I signed the paperwork without hesitation. The pen felt heavier than it should have, but my hand didn't shake. When I left his office, the city felt different. Sharper. More defined. Like the world had switched from soft focus to high resolution. At 4:30 p.m., my phone rang. Kendra. I answered this time. You're being childish, she said immediately. No greeting. No pause. This doesn't have to be difficult. I agree, I said calmly. There was a brief silence. She hadn't expected that. Then let's be adults, she continued, recovering. The money's already moved. Fighting it will just burn more in legal fees. Where are you staying? I asked. She paused. Long enough for the question to land. What does that matter? Just curious where home is now. Miles, focus, she snapped. I'm having my lawyer draw up settlement papers. It's cleaner this way. Who's your lawyer? I asked. Another pause. This one shorter. David Lawrence. I wrote the name down. Thank you. You're not even listening, she said. This doesn't have to be ugly. You already said that, I replied. Cleaner is better. When we hung up, I called Thomas back and gave him the name. Then I sent Kendra one final text. Taking some time to process. We'll reach out when I'm ready to discuss details. Her reply came almost instantly. Don't wait too long. Papers will be ready by Friday. Friday was 3 days away. Perfect. At 6 that evening, Rita called. The monitoring system flagged 3 separate attempts to initiate transfers today, she said. All blocked. All documented. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. And the access location? I asked. Arizona, she said. Scottsdale. Not Sedona. I thanked her and hung up, then walked slowly through the house. The rooms felt different now. Less like spaces I lived in, more like evidence waiting to be catalogued. I poured a glass of scotch we'd been saving for our 15th anniversary and didn't toast anything. I just drank. The next morning, David Lawrence called. His tone was careful. Professional. But tight. Mr. Hartley, I'm representing your wife in your separation. She's indicated you're amenable to a straightforward settlement. Which situation are we discussing? I asked. The one she described, or the one that actually exists? Silence. She's provided statements, he said finally. Recent ones. From 3 months ago? I asked. Another pause. I suggest you verify the structure of the inheritance she claims to have moved, I said evenly. My attorney will send documentation today. The call ended shortly after. I drove straight to Brightstone Bank, where we kept our joint accounts for years. The manager, Harold, greeted me warmly until he pulled up the records. There have been significant withdrawals, he said slowly, scrolling. How significant? I asked. He turned the screen toward me. Small amounts at first. 2,000. 3,000. Then more. Over months. Escalating. The most recent, 47,000, 2 weeks earlier. This receiving account, I said, pointing. Is it with you? No, he replied. Northern Lakes Credit Union. The name meant nothing to me. But the pattern did. By the time I returned to Thomas's office, the picture was complete. Kendra had opened a separate account 8 months earlier. In her name only. Using an apartment address in Scottsdale. She'd been siphoning money slowly while still sleeping beside me, still planning trips, still talking about the future. While we were reviewing the documents, Thomas's assistant announced David Lawrence was on the line again. I've reviewed the trust documentation, Lawrence said stiffly. My client may have misrepresented certain aspects of the financial situation. That appears to be the case, Thomas replied. The call ended minutes later. Thomas leaned back. He'll drop her by end of day. I nodded, feeling oddly hollow. There's one more thing, I said. I need to know who he is. Thomas nodded. I'll have someone look into it. That evening, a courier delivered an envelope. Inside was a formal letter, David Lawrence withdrawing as Kendra's legal representation. Attached was a note from Thomas. First domino. My phone lit up seconds later. Kendra calling. I let it go to voicemail. Her text came immediately after. What the hell did you do? I didn't answer. Instead, I opened an email from Rita with the subject line update. The trust company had completed its investigation. Multiple unauthorized access attempts. Detailed logs. IP addresses. Device identifiers. All forwarded to their legal department for potential criminal review. No action required from you at this time, Rita wrote. But be aware, this path is now open. I forwarded everything to Thomas and set my phone down. At 9:14 p.m., Kendra texted again. We need to talk now. Through your new attorney, I replied. When you have one. Her response came slower this time. I was angry. I didn't actually move anything. That's not what the logs show, I wrote. A long pause. What logs? I didn't answer that. Instead, I sent one question. Who is he? 20 minutes passed before the reply arrived. Jason, she wrote. But he's not important. Last name? Another pause. Berkeley. I didn't respond. I opened my laptop and searched the name. Jason Berkeley. Yoga instructor. Scottsdale. Former investment broker. Left finance 3 years ago to pursue more meaningful connections. And suddenly, everything aligned. The retreats. The advice. The urgency. The trap she thought she'd set. The next morning, Thomas called. We have a complication, he said. She's hired Philip Barnes. Barnes had a reputation. Aggressive. Expensive. Relentless. He's requested an emergency hearing to contest the financial misconduct claim, Thomas continued. Monday morning. 3 days away. I looked out the window at the river below, moving steadily, indifferent to everything happening above it. Then let's give him something to think about, I said. Because if Barnes wanted a fight, he was about to get the full picture. All at once. Thomas didn't exaggerate when he said Barnes would move fast. By noon, Barnes's office had already filed a motion demanding an emergency hearing. Financial misconduct disputed. Evidence challenged. Urgency emphasized. It was the legal equivalent of flipping the table before anyone could finish reading the cards. 3 days. That's how long Kendra thought she had to force a settlement before the details caught up with her. 3 days to turn momentum into leverage. 3 days to make me look like the unreasonable one. She still thought I was reacting. I wasn't. That afternoon, Thomas and I assembled everything into a single package. Not a summary. Not a highlight reel. The entire story, end to end. Bank records showing the slow siphoning from our joint accounts. The Scottsdale apartment lease. The Northern Lakes account. The trust access logs with timestamps and IP addresses. Screenshots from the cloud folder she'd forgotten to delete. Notes in her handwriting about transfer procedures. We didn't argue anything. We let the documents speak. By 5 o'clock, the package was delivered to Barnes's office. At 5:37 p.m., Thomas's phone rang. "He's seen enough," Thomas said after hanging up. "Requested an urgent meeting. Wants to discuss settlement options." I didn't feel relief. I felt confirmation. Barnes didn't call again that evening. Neither did Kendra. That silence told me everything I needed to know. The confidence was gone. Now they were recalculating. If you're listening right now, ask yourself, what would you do at this point? Push for maximum punishment? Or take control and decide how this ends? Because the choice I made surprised even my own attorney. The meeting was scheduled for the next morning. I didn't attend. Instead, I sat alone in my office while Thomas handled it. I didn't need to be there to watch the collapse. I already understood the structure well enough to know where it would fail. Thomas called an hour later. "They're offering a clean split," he said. "She keeps what she's already taken. Makes no further claims. You keep the house and the inheritance. Full non-disclosure." I stared at the framed photo on my desk. The only picture of my Aunt Elaine I kept there. Her expression steady. Practical. As if she'd expected this kind of decision. "Counter," I said. Thomas paused. "You could get more." "I don't want more," I replied. "I want done." I dictated the terms slowly, carefully. She would return half of what she'd taken from the joint accounts. She would sign a non-disclosure agreement. And in exchange, I would not pursue the fraud angle related to the trust. Thomas was quiet for a moment. "She'll take it," he said finally. "Because the alternative is worse." The next morning, the morning of what would have been our emergency hearing, I waited in a consultation room while Thomas met with Barnes and Kendra down the hall. Through the glass wall, I could see her pacing. Her posture stiff. Her confidence gone. Barnes leaned close, whispering urgently, tapping documents with his finger. She nodded slowly, like someone realizing the floor beneath them wasn't solid after all. Thomas entered the room with the settlement agreement already prepared. Barnes followed with Kendra. She didn't look at me at first. "My client accepts the terms," Barnes said formally. Kendra signed without reading. Her handwriting was shaky, but determined. Barnes signed. Thomas slid the document toward me. I signed. Then I slid one more envelope across the table. "What's this?" she asked. The first word she'd spoken to me in days. "The passwords," I said. "To the cloud storage. The house alarm. Anything else you might need to collect what's yours." She finally looked up at me then. Not angry. Not defiant. Lost. Barnes placed a hand on her arm and guided her toward the door. She clutched the envelope like it weighed more than paper ever should. I stayed seated long after they left. Because while the legal battle was over, I knew one thing remained unresolved. Jason Berkeley. I needed to understand who he really was. Not to confront him. Not to punish him. But to see the full shape of what I'd missed. That afternoon, I met with Frank, our neighbor. "The guy you saw dropping Kendra off," I said. "Would you recognize him again?" Frank nodded. "Tall. Beard. Gray Tesla. Came by a lot while you were traveling." I showed him the photo from the email. "That's him," Frank said without hesitation. I thanked him and asked if he'd be willing to provide a statement. He agreed immediately. That evening, Thomas called again. "There's something you should know," he said. Barnes withdrew the emergency hearing request. I smiled faintly. "And?" I asked. "And," Thomas continued, "Jason Berkeley's financial license was never fully surrendered. He was barred." That piece settled into place with a quiet finality. The retreats. The advice. The urgency. The false confidence. He hadn't just influenced her. He'd used her. My phone buzzed then. A text from Kendra. "I didn't mean for this to go so far." I stared at the message for a long time before typing my response. It didn't have to. I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair, knowing something she didn't yet know. This wasn't over for her. But it was about to be. Because the trust company's legal department hadn't finished their review. And the consequences she'd avoided were still on the table. The letter arrived without ceremony. No logo on the envelope. No dramatic markings. Just my name typed neatly on the front, postmarked from Atlanta. I knew what it was before I opened it. I'd been expecting it since the moment Rita said the words, "This path is now open." I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Kendra and I had once mapped out vacations, renovations, futures that never quite happened, and slid a finger under the flap. The trust company had completed its review. Multiple unauthorized access attempts. Documented. Timestamped. Correlated with device identifiers and IP addresses traced back to Scottsdale. The report was factual, clinical, and devastating in its precision. It didn't accuse. It concluded. At the bottom was a single paragraph that mattered most. The matter has been referred to our legal department for further action. No involvement required from you at this time. I folded the letter carefully and set it down. That was it. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. Mostly, I felt finished. Like a long project had finally reached its final inspection, and everything that needed reinforcing had already been reinforced. Kendra called that evening. I watched the phone vibrate on the counter until it stopped. Then she texted. Please. I just want to understand what happens now. I didn't reply right away. I stepped outside instead, onto the porch, letting the humid savanna air settle around me. The hydrangeas were still blooming along the stone path. I'd planted them myself, one by one, not knowing they'd outlast the marriage they were meant to frame. After a while, I typed back. You should talk to your attorney. A minute passed. I don't have one, she replied. That was the consequence she hadn't planned for. Jason Berkeley vanished quietly. His social media accounts disappeared within days. The yoga studio removed his bio. The retreat stopped being advertised. Whatever meaningful connections he'd been pursuing no longer wanted his name attached. I never spoke to him. I didn't need to. Men like that collapse inward once the spotlight turns on. They don't fight. They retreat. The divorce finalized without incident. No courtroom. No raised voices. Just signatures, filings, and the quiet dismantling of a shared life. Kendra moved out of the Scottsdale apartment within a month. I heard that secondhand, through Thomas. He didn't offer details. He didn't need to. 6 months later, I sold the house on Victory Drive. A young couple with twins bought it. They loved the wraparound porch, the backyard, the hydrangeas. Watching them walk through the rooms, imagining a future that still felt possible, was strangely comforting. Like passing a torch instead of losing one. I moved into a smaller place downtown, closer to my firm. Fewer rooms. Fewer things. Less space for echoes. With Rita's help, I restructured my Aunt Elaine's inheritance into a foundation supporting architectural scholarships for students who'd lost parents. The first recipient was a 17-year-old girl from South Georgia. Her essay talked about designing spaces that helped people feel safe again. Elaine would have loved her. One afternoon, months later, I checked my mail in the lobby and found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a check for $89,275 and a short note written in familiar handwriting. The rest of what I owed. No signature. None needed. I didn't cash it right away. I carried it down to the riverfront instead, sat on a bench, and watched cargo ships pass slowly by. Massive structures moving steadily forward, unaffected by the currents beneath them. The next day, I deposited the check into the foundation account. Another scholarship. Another chance to build something that might actually last. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Jerry, my advisor. Dinner still on for 7? Bringing that architect I mentioned. I looked at the skyline reflected in the glass of nearby buildings. Thought about how many endings feel like beginnings once you stop fighting them. Yeah, I texted back. I'll be there. If you've listened this far, ask yourself one thing. What would you have done differently? Would you have confronted sooner? Demanded explanations? Tried to win loudly? Or would you have done what I did, waited, watched, and let the truth surface on its own? Because sometimes the strongest response to betrayal isn't revenge. It's rebuilding. And this time, I built something that didn't need anyone else to stand. Before you go, hit like so more people find it. Subscribe for the next one, because the quiet endings always hit the hardest.